We're staying in our ground floor plan.dwg file. And in the previous video, we looked at how we could draw this rectangle and this circle accurately using object snaps and auto snap. What I'd like you to do is zoom out slightly and just pan across to the next grid square, this one here, to the left of where we've created this table. So we've got a nice big space there. Again, just zoom in nice and close so that you can see what you're doing. Now, we're staying on the same layer here, so we're going to be utilizing the same layer, drawing another table exactly the same size, but we're going to utilize some different tools to do it. Now, you'll notice down on the status bar, I mentioned our polar tracking. Now, normally, I leave that on all the time. What I'd like you to do is click on the little flyout arrow there and make sure that it is set to increments of 90 degrees, like so. And what we're going to do, we're going to draw a closed polyline instead of using the rectangle command. Now, this is really clever because it saves you a huge amount of time when you're drawing individual segments of a polyline. So let's go to the polyline command. That's on the draw panel here. And there's polyline there. On the home tab on the ribbon, I hasten to add. Click on polyline and come into the drawing area. Now, just like we did with the rectangle and the line command and lots of other AutoCAD commands, it asks for a start point. I'm going to pick a point about there, left click. And as you can see, it looks very much like the line command. Now, because we've got our polar tracking switched on, I can drag horizontally now. Can you see that? And I can specify a distance along that polar tracking line. Be careful with your mouse and make sure that the cursor and the crosshairs stay with the polar tracking line. So the 0 degrees to the right is now set. So I type in 3500 and I press enter once. Direct distance entry, quick and easy. I can then come vertically up. Again, can you see the polar tracking line follows me like so? So this time it's going to be 2500, like the previous table in the previous video. And we do the same and we just work our way around like so. So I go to the left now, can you see? Left hand tracking line going off to the left, 3500 again, and press enter. Now the good thing is we can cheat now. We can just right click and select close on the shortcut menu, and that closes our polyline. If I hover over that, you can see it's a closed polyline, just like this one over here is also a closed polyline. Okay, so that's one way of drawing your table. Now, the other really cool thing with polar tracking, though, is you can specify individual polar tracking angles. Now, if we come down to polar tracking down here, like so, there's polar tracking, and I right click on it, I can go into the tracking settings. Now, polar tracking is on with increments of 90 degrees, as you can see there, in the polar tracking tab in the drafting settings dialog box. Let's switch on additional angles and click on new. And I want a new angle of 67 degrees and press enter. There it is there. So that's our additional angle. Now bear in mind, it will not increment to different increments of 67. That is one individual additional angle set in our polar tracking settings. So if I OK that now and go to the line command on the draw panel, there's the line command. Hover over that endpoint snap there and left click, and that is the first point of my line. Now, as I drag the mouse upwards to the right, keep an eye out. There's my polar tracking. Can you see that? There's my 67 degrees. Can you see that on the readout on the dynamic input? So at the moment, that line that I've drawn from the initial first point is 1455.97 long, and it's going off at an angle of 67 degrees from the 0 line, which is to the east 0. Remember that default setting. So as you can see there, I can set individual angles that might be useful if I'm using specific angles for drafting, say, a mechanical part, or perhaps a location in a geographical environment, for example. I'm just going to hit escape there just to cancel that because we don't actually need that line. What I'm also going to do is go down to polar tracking again, right click on it and go into tracking settings. That 67 there isn't needed, so I can select it, right click on it, and you'll see it, there's no right click menu. It's right here, delete. You'd think that you'd right click on that to delete it. You don't, you just delete it there like so. Okay, and that 67 is now removed from the polar tracking settings. So that's one way of creating our closed polyline. Let's do that a slightly different way. Let's use orthogonal. Now, orthogonal is a really weird word. Orthogonal projection, it's basically working in vertical and horizontal constraints. So what we're going to do, we're going to select the rectangle, right-click and erase on the shortcut menu. And go down to the status bar. There's polar. I'm going to turn polar off. And I'm going to switch this one here. Looks like a right angle, ortho on. Now you'll notice when I switch polar back on again, ortho goes off. You cannot have them both running at the same time. So if I click on ortho, polar goes off anyway on the status bar. Now this is another way of drawing things. And what it does is it constrains you to the X and Y axes. So I'm now going to go up to my polyline command here, like so. Come into the drawing area, and I'm going to pick a start point like I did before. Now you'll notice, look, I move the mouse around, I can only go horizontal and vertical with ortho. So I just drag along, I type 3500 in the direct distance entry there. There's my line, and I can just drag up vertically 2500, enter, drag to the left, 3500, enter, and then it's a right click and close. There we go. And that is now still a closed polyline of the same sizes that we did before. Ortho is restrictive, and it's deliberately restrictive because it's tying you down to the X and Y axes. If you want a bit more freehand, turn the ortho off and put the polar tracking on, and use polar tracking to work with angle increments and individual angles. Depends on what you're drawing, depends on what environment you're drawing in, and so on and so forth. But that's utilizing polar and ortho to add geometry to your drawings.